Hey guys, John Thompson, Spring Framework Guru. Today we're going to take a look at creating a JPA DAO service. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it pure JPA. There's a few different ways we can handle this. Actually, there's a lot of different ways we can handle this. But I didn't want to make it Hibernate specific. I want to stay to the JPA standard here, so I'm going to do it a little more raw, a little more old-fashioned, so to speak. It's not that there are easier ways to do it where you can do it Hibernate specific, but I want to stay on the JPA standard in this. So I'm going to create a little DAO around the entity manager and using pure JPA. And what we're going to do is create another implementation of the product service for our CRUD operations. And to do that, we have that existing service that's the map operation. And we want a JPA operation now. And you might go, well, how do we handle that? If you remember back in the dependency injection section where we set up profiles, well, we're going to use profiles to control which one gets injected. So I'm going to introduce a new profile, and we'll set that as an active profile. So that gets injected into our class as the JPA DAO manager, and it'll replace, instead of having the map service come in, we'll have the JPA DAO service come in. And that map service won't even get created because of how we configure the profiles on this. And then this will be using pure JPA to persist entities into the database, into the H2 in-memory database. So we saw how we created the entities and how Hibernate created the tables. Well, now we're going to use JPA to do CRUD operations into that. And we just need to provide an implementation of those that will actually do persistence through JPA. Now, the first thing that we want to do is create another implementation. So I'm going to review this. So this is our implementation of the map service. Now we need to create another one of these, but this time we're going to use a DAO service. So what I'm going to do is come in, say new Java class, and let's call this product service JPA DAO impl. Okay, so I'm following the impl customary or convention that Java developers like to use. We're going to add this into Git so you guys can see it later. And now we're going to say implements our product service. And I'm going to come down here and just hit Command N in IntelliJ and say implement methods. And this is going to give me a stub of all the methods that we need to implement. Now we need to make this a service component. Okay, this tells Springs that this is a component. Now we're also going to add a profile to it. Now I'm going to call the profile, Alt-Enter to take that in, JPA DAO. And on the old one, let's also add a profile. I'm just going to call it that map. We need to set that profile active, so I'm going to go over to the application properties. Just type in active, IntelliJ will find that. So we want Spring profiles active, and we're going to say JPA DAO. So that'll set that profile active. So now we have a stub of our implementation, and the first thing we want to do is set up an entity manager factory. So there's my entity manager factory. It's out of the JavaX persistence. And by tradition, a lot of developers just call it EMF. Now I'm going to do Command N, add a setter for it. And now we're going to introduce a new annotation called persistence unit. And this is also part of the JPA standard. This is not Spring specific. This is out of JPA. And it's telling it to inject in that entity manager factory. So we'll get an instance of that. So right now we're keeping this generic. So if we wanted to switch from Hibernate to Eclipse Link or some other JPA implementation, we could, and there would be no impact to this. Now let's go ahead and work on the list. So what we want to do for the list, the first thing we want to do, I also want to point out entity manager, we want an entity manager, but we're using a factory. So the factory is thread safe while the entity manager itself is not. So that's why in our classes we'll be grabbing a new entity manager. So the first thing we're going to do is grab an entity manager, call him EM. Okay, and I also want to change the generics here to be product. Now, to do this, we can just return right from the entity manager. We're going to create a query. And we just say from product, very simple query. This is the Java dialect. And we tell the entity manager that we want to use a product.class. And now we're going to use a method called getResultList. And this tells the entity manager to create a query, and we're just doing a select from products, so it's going to select all products and return that as a list. Now let's implement the get by ID. That's a little bit different. Again, we're going to create an entity manager. And this time we're going to return a query. We're going to be looking for a specific entity, so that the standard provides us a find, and we can say product and then pass in the ID value. So this is a real simple method, so it allows us to find the product by ID, and it'll return null if not found. Now both of these here were not transactional, so we didn't talk about transactions here, but now we're going to get into save or update, and that is transactional. So in this case, what we're going to do is, again, we create the entity manager. Now we're going to say EM get the transaction, and we're going to begin one. Now we're going to save a product, and remember, we're returning a product, so we want to return back that saved product. We have a persist option, and the persist is just going to save whatever entity we give it. And it often will create a new entity, and we don't want that. So we're doing a save or update here. So there's an option called merge. A merge is going to create a new object if it doesn't exist, or merge the properties of that object if it does exist. This is exactly the behavior that we want in the save or update, because we're either going to save a new object or update an object, so that this will handle that functionality for us. The next step we want to do is take that transaction and commit it. Now this is going to save that, and finally we want to return the saved product. That will return back that saved entity, and by that, if it's a brand new entity, we're not going to have an ID value, and then once it's saved, the ID value will be populated from the database, and the version property will also be populated by whatever's in the database. If it's an update, now we're going to get that new updated entity, and the version property will also be incremented. Finally, we need to implement the delete method, and this is very similar to the update. It's actually kind of a merge of the update and the get. So first thing we need to do is grab a hold of the entity manager. So we're going to begin a transaction, and this time we're going to do entity manager remove, but we're also going to do entity manager find, because we're deleting by the ID. So we're going to do product class and then ID. Come on, IntelliJ, get that out of there. There we go. Okay, so I'm using the entity manager there. I'm kind of chaining things together. So I'm passing in that em.find is going to find the product based on that ID, and the result of that method call will get passed into the remove. Now I want to get the transaction and commit it. So this is our basic CRUD operations that we've created here. I've gone through and implemented each one. So let's go ahead and run this now. So I'm going to start it up in Spring, or Spring Boot. It's going to compile it and start up in Spring Boot. Okay, we can see that JVM started up normally. I'm going to go grab tab in Chrome for this, and we'll take a look at the web application. Okay, so here's our web page. It's the same page that we had in the Spring MVC modules. Now I'm going to go into products. And now our product list is going to be blank because we haven't created any data yet. So in a future module, I'll show you how to set up some starter data, but let's go ahead and create a record. So I'm going to click on new product. This takes us to the same form. Make him $12 and some URL. And now I'm going to click submit. And we can see that that was persisted to the database. And if I come back, I'm going to back up to the list products. And I need to refresh that because I was out of the browser cache. Now we can see that my new product is there. Now let's go ahead and update him. So I'm going to change the name on it. And now we see that we had an error. Okay, so I got a product ID 2. And that's not the desired behavior. So let's go back to list products. And I'm going to refresh this. And now we have my new product and new name. We have two different products, but the same thing. And this is a little quirk in JPA because let's go and take a look. And what we did not do is we did not give it the version number on the template. So if I go to the form, now we can see that I'm passing the ID, but I don't have an input form value of the version. And it's a version number, the missing version number, that's causing a new product to be created rather than it being merged. So it's kind of a quirk in JPA. It's an easy gotcha. But if you see something like this happening, it's easy enough to correct. You just have to provide the version property. So let's go in, and I'm going to restart this now. Now we are back up. We can see that Tomcat has started up on port 8080. So I'm going to toggle over to the browser. And let's go back to the root. And now let's go to products. And now I have an empty product list again. And that's because we restarted the context and the database, the H2 database, was recreated. So let's go ahead and create a new product. I'm going to submit it. We can see that it's persisted as product ID 1. So let's go back to the list. We'll refresh that. And now let's go ahead and edit that. So now I'm going to save it. And we can see that it was saved as product ID 1. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the list and hit refresh. And we can see that that was created. Just do another. Give us some random string for the image URL. I'm going to submit that. We can see product ID 2 was created. I'm going to go back to the list products and refresh that. And there's another product. So now we have our CRUD operations restored. So I just want to do a quick review here. So we did 3 things. We took our existing class and added a profile map to it. We created a new implementation to support the CRUD operations using pure JPA, not Hibernate specific, but pure JPA. And we're using the entity manager to save, persist, and delete objects and also get them from the database. We had to update the product form to add in the ID value, and then the application properties to set the proper profile for us. Okay, so in this module, I showed you how to create a new class, so a new implementation of our persistence using JPA. So previously we had that map one that we used for our initial testing when we were learning about Spring MVC. Now we're actually persisting to a database using JPA. And this is an actual in-memory database using H2. It's a SQL relational database that's running in memory for us. And we are taking that, Spring Boot's configuring it for us. We're still relying on Spring Boot to do a lot of things like creating the database and telling Hibernate to create the tables for us based on our entity classes. So all that's happening for us through Spring Boot. And what we've done is we created an implementation using JPA to save those entities to the classes. And you can see at this point, we're now working with a relational database, but we didn't write any SQL at all. We haven't wrote any SQL. We didn't have to write any DML state or DDL statements, which is SQL for data definition language, to create the tables. Hibernate did that for us automatically. We didn't do any DML statements, which is the inserts and the creates and the delete statements through SQL. All that was done automatically through the JPA interface via Hibernate. At this point, we could take this, and we're running an H2, but we could do another profile in Spring, and I'm going to show you how to do this further down the road. But this database would run just fine against MySQL. So we could have running MySQL locally, then a deploy MySQL, different properties, and we can do that through all Spring configuration, where we'll take in, we have the map interface implementation that we started with. We can toss that out and then bring in the JPA H2 configuration, or we can switch some flags and bring in MySQL locally, or MySQL on a database server somewhere for a production deployment. And this is one of the strengths of the Spring framework. So we have the whole web front end, and it's going through the controller, and all that stuff is completely decoupled from the persistence layer. And that's kind of why I went down this road of showing you how to set up the map implementation, because I wanted to see how that could be decoupled from the database persistence implementation. And further down the road, if we wanted to use a web service to persist this to something that we didn't care about, we could. We could use a NoSQL database like MongoDB, which is a pretty cool database to play with, but totally different paradigm from a relational database, and a totally different tool set to persist data with it. That could be another implementation further down the road. And through Spring configuration, we can take these components and wire them together and have a cohesive application that can deploy in multiple environments and work just fine. Now, one thing that we didn't recreate in the map implementation, we set up some test data for ourselves. In the next module, I'm going to show you how to create test data on startup. And we will use a Spring event. We're going to trigger into that Spring event, grab a hold of that event, and use that to trigger setting up test data for our implementation.